Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the long-awaited webinar on alternatives to the duopoly of Google and Facebook. I'm Karen Cahill and I'll be your host this afternoon. Scott Lawrence and Bella Robbins are also on the line.
Hello everyone.
Hey everybody.
And as usual, I'll get the housekeeping items out of the way by asking everyone to please submit any questions and comments in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. That way, if we can't get to your question during the webinar, we can pull it from the Q&A report afterwards and get back to you later. And we'll also provide an email at the end for any additional questions you may think of after we're finished.
And for those unfamiliar with ResponseMind Digital, we are a digital marketing agency based in Atlanta. And we'll go into a little more detail later about who we are and what we do.
And a lot of people have said they were confused by our name. So I thought I'd tell everyone that ResponseMind actually refers to the fact that we're direct response digital marketing marketers. So, which is to say we're not a branding agency. We're really all about getting people to respond to our marketing, because marketing is, we think, is really supposed to be about making sales.
And the word mine in ResponseMind refers to how we're always mining for responses. We're mining for gold in digital marketing. In other words, we're always testing what performs the best, testing different copy, landing pages, images, calls to action, those sorts of things.
Right, so without further ado, let's take a quick look at today's agenda. And the first order of business is to talk about why people seem to be looking for marketing alternatives today. So the first bit is sort of a how do we get here segment. And we're going to start with a brief history of Google since they've been in the spotlight for a while. And then we're going to talk about how and why privacy has become such a big deal. And then we're going to address how several of the most popular social platforms are performing.
And then just after the TikTok segment, I'll give about a 2-minute commercial break to talk about who we are and what we do at RMD.
And let's not forget about the fun trivia questions. So that's where we're going to drop onto the screen a little poll for everyone to answer. They are completely anonymous trivia questions related to whatever segment we happen to be on at the time. It's kind of fun, it's interactive, there are multiple choice questions, and they are completely anonymous. So we'd appreciate it if everyone would take the time to answer and help us break down the barrier between us all.
Right, it makes it more fun if everybody answers. So, right, that covers what we're doing today. And in order for everyone to know where we are during this presentation, we've also included a little agenda bar at the bottom of the page. So hopefully everyone will find that to be helpful as well. The agenda enables everyone to know where we're going and what we're doing and where we are. So without further ado, again, let's get started. So Scott, I think that this question is a good one to kick off the topic of why we're even having this webinar today. So what's the answer?
Yeah, so in order to answer that question, we need to have just a really extraordinarily abbreviated history of Google. Next.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so as you can see here, we have a timeline on the screen for the life of Google, which started in 1998. And I'm not going to get into how the founder started this business in the garage and all that stuff, but I hope to just hit on the highlights of how it relates to privacy with a couple of interesting little tidbits thrown in.
And right off the bat, this is where I think we should put in the first fun trivia question. So if you would, please take a guess if you're like most of us and don't know the answer. In 1999, how much money did Google offer to sell their search platform to Excite.com? Or was it 750,000, 1.5 million, 5 million, or $10 million? And we're going to give you just a few seconds to guess.
Okay, answers have come in. We've got about 2/3 of the people weighing in, 67% now. 68%. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and call it. I'll give you 2 more seconds. All right, here we go. All right. 27% said 750,000. 42% of y'all said 1.5 million. 18% said 5 million, and 14% said 10 million. So thanks.
Well, Google, which currently has a market cap of about $1.8 trillion, and that is trillion with a T, did indeed try to sell their search platform to Excite.com for $750,000. In other words, Excite.com could have arguably become the next Google, but they passed on that golden opportunity, and that's got to hurt. Excite.com is still around, but I wouldn't say they're exactly killing it.
No, not exactly. They actually initially, so Google actually initially offered to sell it for $1 million. And then when the Excite CEO, George Bell, said no, they came back with $750,000 bargain basement kind of deal. Anyway, the answer was still no. And both Google founders said that they were against advertising funded search engines at the time, and even wrote a paper about it while at Stanford. But they appear to have changed their minds in 2000 when they began offering simple text ads.
And fast forward to 2004, and they've got their initial public offering, and that's also the year that they started Gmail.
Yeah, and it's also the year that people started to get sort of creeped out by Google. I mean, Google's self-proclaimed code of conduct that they even included in their prospectus for their IPO was "Don't be evil," noting that, hey, we believe strongly in the long term we'll be better served by a company that does good things for the world, even if we forego some short-term gains.
So, Scott, why were people creeped out?
So, well, Google began catering ads to people based on what those people wrote in their emails at the time. So, for instance, if my wife emails me and asks me what I want for dinner, and I responded that I'd like spaghetti, I might start seeing ads for Prego or Ragu or something.
So it was an automated, anonymized function, but it was a relatively new development in 2004, where people believed that Google was actually reading their mail.
Right. And they've done away with that feature since, but some people began to feel encroached upon. And at that time, Google had committed not to make any ad tracking personally identifiable.
Okay, so they've IPO'd and now they're making a lot of money growing and making acquisitions. But then the Great Recession hit in 2008.
Right. And their ad revenue was already facing signs of decline as early as 2006. And with a market cap then of more than 100 billion, if Google were to go bankrupt, it really would have had serious implications for the market. And in Q2 of 2009, in the depth of recession, they actually gained only 3%.
Okay, so even Google was struggling in 2009. But in 2008, they launched Google Chrome, their own internet browser, and that changed some things for them.
Yeah, well, that is tied to in part to the $3.1 billion acquisition they made in 2007 of DoubleClick, which had been the internet's largest advertising network. It wasn't on too many people's radar back then, but the Federal Trade Commission had previously investigated DoubleClick for unlawfully compiling data on consumers' shopping habits and setting that information to selling it to third-party advertisers.
Sounds familiar. But Google said they wouldn't do that when they bought DoubleClick in 2007. Sergey Brin specifically said that privacy would be the company's #1 priority.
That's true. And the FTC didn't block that purchase either, stating that the acquisition wasn't likely to hinder a competition.
Wow.
Yeah, but in 2012, Google changed its privacy policy to allow it to share data across different platforms like Gmail and Search. And then in 2016, Google, excuse me, Google reversed Sergey Brin's declaration and made the decision that ad tracking could become personally identifiable.
So at that point, Google began personally identifying consumers on the internet by what they were searching for, what their emails contained, and what websites they visited.
Yes. And they started doing that so that they could provide arguably the best, most targeted advertising to businesses who want to reach people with certain buying preferences.
Which means they can offer a better advertising solution, which means they're going to make a lot more money. So much for foregoing the monetary gains, foregoing those.
Yeah, right. But then companies like Apple noticed that consumers really don't like being tracked around the internet. And as we're about to see, there have been a lot of competitive products recently that are more privacy focused than Google and Facebook have traditionally been.
And that's a nice segue to the growth of privacy concerns, which could arguably come at the expense of Facebook. Okay, so some of us are old enough to remember the CAN-SPAM Act, which in the United States was legislation put in place in part to protect internet users' privacy. Marketing automation had made it extremely easy for marketers to send tens of thousands of emails with a single click, and it was really annoying to get so much spam email.
Yeah, but what really started to get people's attention, I think, was just the massive data breaches that were happening. I mean, we were all getting used to giving our personal information back then to websites to ease the process of purchasing. Most people didn't like the idea, though, that they had to put in their credit card number every time they purchase online. But, what companies' websites could we really trust to house that information?
I can see how that would heighten the senses as to how much of our personal information is floating around on the web. And that was the first breach of more than 1 million contacts. But that was actually nothing compared to 8 years later when 3.5 billion Yahoo users were also compromised.
Right. And to be clear, it was a breach of 3 billion users, which is just massive. And then another 500 million the following year. So 3.5 billion is about half the world's population when you think about it. So that's obviously going to hurt Yahoo's image quite a bit.
So data and privacy concerns really appeared to be a big problem for a lot of people, but Europe was, probably on the cutting edge of it all. Europe in the last decade seems to have been really concerned about their privacy.
Yeah, well, for whatever reason, European publications were really hounding Facebook back then because they were using European user information without their permission, and Europeans were really unhappy about it. And soon after these reports about Facebook surfaced, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook publicly apologized, and he later testified in front of Congress as to what had happened and what steps were being taken to correct what seemed to be an invasion of privacy. And the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, was passed in 2018.
And soon after, California, where Facebook and Google are based, passed their own GDPR type of law called the California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA. Okay, so I think that catches us up on how we got here. And now it's time to move into where we are today.
Right. Well, so privacy and competition are invariably linked when it comes to much of digital marketing. Those who attended our webinar on marketing in a cookieless internet know why the internet should be, is likely to be third-party cookieless by 2023 when Google Chrome says they'll do away with third-party cookies.
Right, and in that webinar, we talked about how Chrome's competitor, Apple Safari, stopped all third-party tracking, and Firefox was next, and they both stole market share from Google Chrome as a result.
Right. And Apple's iPhone stopped IDFAs last year. So Facebook and others can't track you like they used to. Anyway, privacy is a pretty big deal right now, and one that Apple and others are counting on to win market share over their competitors. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Apple CEO Tim Cook were publicly arguing online last year, just before Apple's iOS 14.5 started blocking Facebook's tracking mechanisms. But it's much more than just a battle between Facebook and Apple. The search engine DuckDuckGo, for instance, has been running a very large international outdoor campaign to highlight the point that they're very private. And this is actually a board I saw just south of downtown Atlanta, but they have signs, I mean, literally just everywhere. And that one's from Stockholm and that one's from Zurich. And I mean, they're all over the place. And outdoor campaigns like this really aren't cheap. They're investing pretty heavily on the idea that people very much want a more private exchange online.
Okay, we're going to talk specifically about DuckDuckGo towards the end of the webinar when we're discussing search engines. But we know that there have been social media platforms like Pinterest and MeWe and Snapchat that have paid really close attention to consumers' privacy concerns. And social media platforms also appear to be competing to show that they're more privacy friendly than the others. So Bella's going to cover some of those examples next.
All right, well, before we dive into this, I should say that it's very true that privacy concerns appear to be driving a lot of change, but privacy concerns also don't seem to have hurt, for example, TikTok's opportunity in the US or anywhere else for that matter. Still, they've grown so popular in the last couple of years that we felt we should definitely include them in this segment as well. But apps such as Facebook and Snapchat and TikTok use what's known as an IDFA, as Scott mentioned, or an identifier for advertisers. And I just put a little animation in here to help make that clear how they work. But Apple's iOS 14.5 released a few months ago, and it's enabling users to block IDFAs, which are a lot like third-party cookies, but for mobile phones. Anyway, Apple blocking IDFAs matters in two really big ways. The first is measurement. Social media platforms will not only struggle to show performance at the campaign level, which advertisers need, but it'll also be really difficult to identify fraud. And then the second way this impacts us is with retargeting.
And retargeting is what we call it when an advertiser continues to market to consumers who may have clicked on their ad or gone to their website. So they continue to serve them up ads following them around the internet.
Right. Device level targeting won't work for people who opt out of sharing. That'll cause a reduction in targetable audiences for social media platforms.
Okay, that's good to note. But now we're veering into our cookie-less webinar. So let's talk about how some social media platforms are taking privacy more seriously.
All right, well, Facebook and TikTok don't really fit that bill. However, we are going to spend some time talking about TikTok in a few minutes, just because of the impact they're having on the social media space. But let's talk about Snapchat. Not one you would think is big on privacy, but first of all, Snap Inc. started as a camera company, and they initially focused on person-to-person photo sharing, which would seem like they started out with the intent to provide a more private experience. But of course, today they've grown way past that.
Okay, so Bella, what do you like about their privacy platform?
Well, with Snap, you can turn off third-party advertiser sharing, audience-based targeting, and activity-based targeting. Also, you can configure which data is shared. For instance, within the map feature, you can turn on ghost mode when you want to go off grid, but you can also choose who can see your location and if they can see it at all.
Yeah, and it seems relevant. That seems relevant because people who stay logged into Google's geolocation service to use something like Google Maps are actually followed into stores by Google, which Google reports to advertisers who turn on what's known as store visits in Google Analytics.
Right. I mean, not everyone is creeped out by tactics such as Google's store visits, but some people are, primarily because I think they're not able to opt out of being followed into the store, or unless they log out of their Google accounts or remember to turn off geolocation services when not using Google Maps. So anyway, most people stay logged into their Google accounts as a matter of convenience.
Okay, so privacy appears to be a greater concern to Snap than to some other social media platforms. Perhaps that will have some impact on how many people use their platform as privacy issues continue to be ratcheted up. But let's talk about the user interface for advertisers.
Sure. So the first thing to know is that Snapchat makes it really easy to advertise there, pretty much like all social media platforms do nowadays. When you go to ads.snapchat.com, It asks you what your goals are, and then you have to choose from one of the following 5 goals, at least in the initial setup.
And how does this compare to something like Facebook's user interface?
So it's pretty similar, although a little more direct. Facebook's ad manager has you choose from 3 consideration sets, and those are awareness, consideration, and conversion. But we think these are pretty good groupings here as well. Website visits generally translate to online sales for most B2C businesses, so that's not terrible. And some businesses, even large national brands like Home Depot, attempt to drive in-store sales. So promoting a local place is also a good objective.
And strange as it is to e-commerce sites, some of those local stores are actually trying to drive calls to their phones. So I guess calls and texts should be a good objective for some.
Right. And then the other 2 make sense to us as well, because there are a lot of businesses that have come out with an app and are trying to stay engaged with their customers. So this is also a fairly good objective. Other than that, the platform is pretty straightforward. I mean, their limited number of calls to action isn't phenomenal. As direct response marketers, we always prefer to test for responses of less than common CTAs. For example, one of our best was see if I qualify, but that's not likely to find its way onto a generic list of common CTAs. But anyway, they make it really simple and difficult to mess up. And in 4 or 5 steps, you set up your campaign, entered a credit card number, and are advertising to a somewhat targeted group.
And when you say it's somewhat targeted, are you referring to how it's not as targeted as Facebook or Google?
Well, yes. So the double-edged sword of retaining privacy is that the more Google and Facebook know about what people are searching for and where they've been browsing on the internet, and even where you've physically visited, the more they can point advertisers to exactly the target that those advertisers want to reach. So if more consumers decide not to opt in to the type of tracking that enables the duopoly to track our interests, it'll be more difficult for social media platforms to offer that sort of intelligence.
Okay, so tell us how detailed Snapchat can make their targeting for advertisers.
So Snapchat has the basics worked out for us. You can see on this slide that gender, age, location are all part of the demographic makeup of who and how we target. And we can make the geographic targeting as narrow as Georgia Tech, a school here in Atlanta, or as broad as a country.
Yeah, you know, my son graduated from Georgia Tech. That school is actually one of the best buys in the 50 states.
Yeah, it's a pretty great school. But the difference is that Facebook versus Snapchat tracks a lot about you. That could be what pages you like, what political or volunteer sports groups you're a part of, what pages you actually visit, even, what you say in your comments. And from that, they can build a profile about who you are and what your interests are. And because of that tracking, as invasive as it may seem, they're able to provide better targeting data to advertisers.
I suppose time will tell as to whether a platform like Snapchat will win market share because of their concern for privacy rights. At any rate, next, I think, Bella, you wanted to show us Pinterest before we look more closely at search engines.
Yes, and that should be right up on the next slide.
Yes.
So this is the page you see when you first create a Pinterest account. Notice that you can log in with your email address at the top, or you can choose to log in using your Facebook or Google credentials.
Yeah, I'm sure many people use this option because it's a lot easier just to click a button than it is to fill in your email and so forth. That's
true. But this is also a way to share data across platforms. And that's fine for convenience, but it's definitely not private. This is a message that a guy named Billy may see when logging into a new platform or app using his Facebook credentials.
So the two platforms are exchanging information about you when you use that nice convenient step.
Right. I'm not trying to condemn taking the easy path, but this webinar does have to specifically do with privacy. So there are a couple of considerations to keep in mind. The first is that privacy policies change pretty regularly, as we've seen from Google and Facebook in the last few years. So everyone should stay up to date on their privacy policies. The second is that signing into several sites with one login can leave accounts as vulnerable as the one with the lowest security. So these so-called daisy-chained accounts can also make identity theft easier for would-be scammers.
Okay, that's a good safety tip. And I know, Val, you're going to tell us about how their marketing platform stacks up against Facebook and Snapchat. But first, do you feel like Pinterest takes privacy a little more seriously than most?
Yeah, I do. First of all, you can choose to unlink your account from these other platforms so that your data stays within Pinterest. And you can also choose if your Pinterest activity, such as your searches and posts, or what Pinterest calls pins, are shared with advertisers. You can also hide your profile from search engines.
And of course, beneath that, we see that under personalization, there's the opportunity to turn off tracking and serving up ads based on your activity, as well as the websites you visit.
Right. Of course, the way they phrase it, they say they're tracking you to improve your Pinterest experience. So they appear to want you not to turn off the tracking. But on the other hand, they're in a very competitive industry. So they probably realize they can win market share if they offer a user what the user wants, which in this case would be more privacy.
Yeah, I guess the important point is that you're able to turn it off.
Correct.
All right, so that's the user experience. What about the advertising options?
So like most social media platforms, Pinterest starts off by asking you your objective.
Yeah, and this looks very similar to the objectives that we covered when we gave our webinar on Facebook recently.
Correct. Facebook calls it simply, as we mentioned before, awareness, consideration, and conversions. And Pinterest puts an action verb in front of those words: build awareness, drive conversion. LinkedIn actually also uses the same words: awareness, consideration, and conversions.
Yeah, as I recall in the Facebook webinar, we discounted the awareness and consideration and suggested everyone focus more on conversions.
That's right. As direct response marketers, again, we think every dollar should be tied to a consumer response. So brand awareness and video views in that left side don't really come close to measuring marketing to a sale. But the conversions column is where we really suggest everyone spend the majority of their time, energy, and money, at least in the effort of making sales.
And that's not all Pinterest has in common with Facebook. They also have an ads manager with a very similar layout.
Yes, and that should be coming up now. And we've already gone into targeting strategies and tactics in our webinar on creating a great paid social campaign. So we don't need to go over all of that again.
And if anyone listening in today is interested in viewing a recording of that webinar, just let us know and we'll send you a copy.
Anyway, some of the similarities that stick out are that you can upload lists of your best customers and create lookalike audiences like Facebook has, except Pinterest calls them act-alike audiences. And you can exclude certain audiences just as you can do with Facebook. And that's really helpful to help hone in on your exact target.
It looks like the targeting here isn't quite as detailed as Facebook, at least related to the demographics. I mean, I see you can target by gender, age, location, and language, just like you can on Facebook. And then there are keywords and interests too. But I don't see education level, whether they're parents or the age of their kids, their political views, those sorts of things.
Right. Well, like I said earlier, social media platforms can target consumers much better than when they track people around the internet, like Google and Facebook have done, exceptionally well. It's just, let's say, yet to be seen whether there will be a backlash against platforms that are tracking everything you do. There's some conflicting evidence for and against, which we'll talk about in a minute. We don't know how much of an impact the privacy thing will have for whether Pinterest, Snapchat, and some others will gain market share by playing to the current internet privacy wave, as Apple has done.
Well, but Google already announced they're going to do away with third-party cookie tracking by 2023. Is that right?
Yes, Google announced that a while back. But in my opinion, I think it's likely because of the pressure they're feeling from Apple's internet browser Safari, which is gaining market share as the issue of privacy continues to be in the spotlight. And the fact is that Google could have turned off third-party cookies the same day they made that announcement. But they likely didn't want to do that because they wouldn't be able to target people as well as they've been doing. And that's their bread and butter.
Okay, well, speaking of Google's bread and butter, our last segment is about search engines that don't track your searches like Google does. We'll head into that in a minute. But before we do, I wanted to ask about some other social media platforms that have been getting a bit of attention lately, such as MeWe and Gab.
Yes, well, those did appear to do, they appear to be doing fairly well, but they're not ad-based. They use a subscription model to pay for their platform. So we didn't feel they were quite as relevant to this webinar.
Okay. And you said you wanted to talk about TikTok, but not because of their commitment to privacy, but because of something else, right?
Right. So TikTok doesn't appear to be all that concerned about people's privacy. Still, we wanted to include a segment on it because of the fact that they're just so popular with young people today.
Yeah, young people like my nephew who really do not appear to worry that much about privacy.
Right. Anyway, TikTok is now beating out both Pinterest and Snapchat for the #3 spot when ranking social media platforms by number of users in the US, according to eMarketer. So they're right here.
But Facebook and Instagram still have a considerable advantage when it comes to actual market share.
Yes, they do, but they're not actively growing like TikTok is. In fact, Facebook is pretty much plateaued at this point. And teens may be fickle, but they're not willing to move to Facebook despite considerable attempts by the platform to attract them. According to this report, Facebook will lose 1.5 million teen users between 2020 and 2025. In fact, last week, after they announced that fewer people were using Facebook, they had the single largest one-day stock drop in the history of US stocks. They lost $232 billion between Wednesday and Thursday last week. Anyway, TikTok has steadily become teens' platform of choice, and still the teens are not giving up on Snapchat yet either.
Right, and as I've mentioned, teens don't appear to care as much about privacy, which may explain some of this. Okay, so after Pinterest and Snapchat, LinkedIn is next, which of course is more of a business or B2B related platform. Then that brings us to Twitter. So how are they looking?
According to eMarketer's Intelligence Insights, Twitter peaked during the pandemic and the election season, but they're likely to lose many of their new users they've gained over the past 2 years as well.
All right. So let's dive a little deeper into TikTok as we did with the other platforms.
So before we look at the ad platform, we thought it might be worthwhile to go over how the user interacts with TikTok first, since we don't think we have a lot of teens attending today, which means there may be people attending who haven't seen TikTok in action before. It's a lot different than Facebook and Snapchat and all the rest, really.
Yeah, we're going to show a short video of Scott here. I believe this is a reenactment of his reaction to TikTok soon after he downloaded it for the first time. And Scott, who is by no means a teenager, but who has teenage children, has made what I think will prove to be a great example of a non-teenager getting on TikTok for the first time.
What are you doing? Yeah, I'm getting it on video.
Filming.
Well, it's not actually filmed at all, but yeah, I'm good.
All right, so look, why would TikTok think that I'm interested in this?
They haven't figured you out yet. Otherwise, they'd probably feed you nonstop kung fu videos and bloopers. But there's a discover button down there. If you hit that, that will help TikTok learn what you like.
Huh. So if I like animals or arts.
Yeah, but I think it also learns from other things, like how long you stay on a video, or maybe there's a like button.
Oh, okay, that's easy.
So now TikTok knows you like art.
Okay, well, that was educational for how a teenager is not likely to act.
Right. Scott may not be the exact target market, but there are lots of people, as the stats have shown, who are exactly the right target for TikTok, which is why advertisers should know about it.
Okay, let's see how to advertise on it.
All right, so when you first log on to TikTok's ads manager, they're a little like Facebook in that they make it exceedingly easy to quickly start spending money with them. In fact, it defaults to the simplified mode found here.
And the basics are pretty much covered there. Connect with customers, website visits, generate leads, drive conversions.
Right, and again, we generally operate in this conversion driving space here. However, we're going to go a different direction with this example because we have a client that actually has a base of customers or users that it reaches with TikTok.
And when you say users, you mean people who use their products and use TikTok.
Right. And that client is cooljobs.com, and they advertise cool jobs to people who are absolutely the types of people who have flocked to TikTok over the last 2 or 3 years.
And that's what you meant when you said they're users, because cooljobs.com actually makes money from people who post jobs on their websites, not from the people who look for jobs there.
Right. It's one of those businesses that requires both a B2C and a B2B approach. They need talent recruiters to post jobs there, but that's only going to happen if enough people are looking for the cool jobs there. So they advertise on TikTok, where a lot of people looking for those types of jobs can be found.
Got it. Okay, so we're not going to look at driving conversions for that group. So where do we focus for that target?
Well, we could stay on this page, but I thought we'd focus on TikTok's custom mode in order to show what we do.
All right, let's take a look at what the custom mode looks like.
So here's where that takes you.
Yeah, this looks familiar. I mean, awareness, consideration, conversion. I mean, those are pretty common social media monikers, aren't they?
Yes. But if it works for, Facebook and Pinterest and the others, who can blame TikTok for using that method? Anyway, for this campaign, reaching out to users rather than buyers, TikTok's a good choice to reach young people. Cooljobs.com wants to reach young people and encourage them to apply for these jobs. So in this case, we're not interested in the conversions. In this case, we're interested only in driving traffic. And because we're trying to drive people to the site rather than driving employers to the site to post jobs, traffic is a pretty great objective.
So, but you wouldn't advertise on TikTok to reach like talent recruiters, right?
No, the data doesn't support doing that, at least at this point. The talent recruiters are not spending a lot of time on TikTok, but the young people they are trying to attract are.
Okay, so we're driving traffic to cooljobs.com to apply for cool jobs. So then what happens?
If we're only trying to drive traffic, the choice is pretty simple.
I guess it is. But from here, we decided that because this is a pretty interactive tool, we wanted to go into TikTok's ad manager and show how it works. So Scott, our non-teenager, went in and made a short recording to show how the tool works on this end. And Scott, do we need any kind of setup for this video?
I don't think so. I just sat down last night, actually, and set up a faux campaign in TikTok for our new client, cooljobs.com. But since we have mostly professional marketers, I think, tuning in today, I tried to stick mostly to how TikTok is different than Facebook, which, probably most people know, rather than go over all the basics of setting up a campaign or whatever.
Okay, that makes sense. So, yeah, let's see it.
Hey, what's up, guys? Scott here, trying to pick up where Bella left off. As she said, we are going to start with a traffic campaign. It just brings you down the page. You're going to have a campaign name. I'm not going to change that for the sake of time. We're big believers in creating split tests. And you can use their format if you like. We don't normally do that. We like to run ours just in 2 separate campaigns and use our own traceable, trackable URLs. Besides, if you do choose the create split test, and you can't do the campaign budget optimization, which we're probably going to want to do, and they do a pretty good job of explaining how that works. I'm going to spend the time on this video, though, talking about how TikTok is different than Facebook and Pinterest and others. But you can see how this works if you're not familiar with it. You spend $20, you get 35, as opposed to spending $20 and getting 30 conversions. That's just how it works. If you don't use the campaign budget optimization, it starts you at no limit. We would suggest that's never a good idea. But they will let you do the lifetime versus daily. If you do the campaign budget optimization, they keep it at daily, and we're big believers of daily. They start you at $50 minimum, but that's going to change based upon who you target. Then we're going to continue. We'll go to the next slide, next page. And again, you've got to have an ag group name. I'm not going to take time to fix that. We're going to send to a website instead of an app. That makes sense. You can use a TikTok pixel just like Facebook and others do. Again, I'm going to try and spend time on what is different about this platform than the others. We would always suggest select a placement. They have Pangle and a number of other places that can have you listed. This Pangle is actually not in the United States. It's South America, Asia. It's in Middle East, and so it wouldn't actually show our ads there anyway if we choose United States. But we always say, well, let's just turn it off. We have a relatively good idea of who's using TikTok in the United States. There's no reason to toggle these off unless you really just don't want your IP to be downloaded. This is automated creative optimization. We think that's a good idea. That shows it's more people in the right place. We would always suggest custom targeting as opposed to automatic targeting. Again, we're going to show it in the United States. You can obviously narrow it down. This is all similar to everybody. Everybody knows that, how this works, gender and age and so forth. We're going to choose these for cool jobs. And then when you get down to the audience, you can, just like most of them, you can have lookalike or custom list to include or exclude. And then this is where it gets interesting because you have interest in behaviors. Obviously, we're going to try and reach people who are, interested in travel, maybe people who are interested in pets, but we probably want to make that a separate campaign because somebody who's a ranch hand or wants to go work with pets or in a zoo or something, sure, we would have a separate campaign for them. And then we would probably also make this a separate campaign. But somebody who's a bartender in, middle of nowhere, I have a friend in Paducah, he would say that's a small town. He wanted to get out and move to Las Vegas. So that would be a good one to also include in our group. Sports and outdoors, sure. We've got people advertising for the Grand Canyon jobs and, ski instructor, that sort of thing. But again, we might want to just build separate campaigns for them. And then this is also really interesting. They've got ad behavior. You can choose people who watched till the end, liked, commented, shared. Just those people you can target. That's a little different. Creator interactions. We're not going to use that, but that is also different. Now, this is also really important. Hashtags are really important for TikTok. And so we would put hashtag cool jobs in there for sure. That is always trending. It gets like it's used uniquely 5 or 6 times every hour, and so that's a good one to include. This is also a little bit different. Device type. You can actually choose the OS and the iOS versions. So, for instance, if I wanted to choose anybody who has the iOS 14.5, which happens to be when they had the no tracking stuff put in there. You can see what happens is as soon as you do that, if we use all, we've got 76 million. It says that's balanced. That's a lot of people. But again, if you choose 14.5 as your amount, it brings it down to below 5 million. So you can see there are lots of ways that you can narrow and hone in on exactly the audience that you want. That is also a little bit different than we've seen in Facebook, Pinterest, Snapchat, and others. And the rest of this is pretty similar. You know, it changes your budget, as I said it would. Now it's at least $20. You can schedule it. We always would suggest, you know, having a start and end time. All day, specific time. Clicks are a good idea. Again, we've got a lot on bid strategy for our paid social webinar. So if you haven't seen that, ask for it, and we'll send it to you. So now we're going to go to the next page. And on the final page, you've got to have an ad name, obviously. This Spark ads, you can't use Spark ads if you're using automated creative optimization. We suggest you test both and see what you get as a result. And as we move down, just for the sake of time, you can upload something new. I've actually got one already queued up in the library here. And here's our ad. I can actually pull that up and let everybody see what that looks like. They give you the opportunity to preview it. Here it is. Okay, pretty simple. Now you've got it queued up. They're going to require you to put a title in here. You can use up to 5 at 100 words each. We don't recommend putting too much in there. And that is about it. You're gonna have to use a trackable, traceable URL here. You can do that through, we use Google's URL builder. But that's it. Submit. Now you've got your campaign running, and good luck. And you know, I should actually also probably insert here that I forgot to include something that's probably just as important as including hashtags. Trending sounds is also a big thing with TikTok. So unlike historical YouTube-like videos, which are played without sound for most people, TikTok listeners like to listen with the sound on. Viewers like to listen with the sound on. So, you know, search for trending sounds and use them in your videos as well.
Okay, thanks so much, Scott. And as I recall from our YouTube webinar, we also offered several tips for really narrowly targeting for specific types of videos. With an audience of several million, this campaign was a lot broader.
Yeah, well, so there are 2 considerations for that. You may recall with the YouTube video webinar, we built a campaign to drive local in-store sales. So we targeted a very specific campaign targeting women of a certain age with a particular geographic range, you know, 30 miles from the store. However, for Cool Jobs, this is a national campaign and we're trying to drive them to a website. So it's very different. Still, with that said, I did set this up as pretty generic campaign, even for national campaigns. We typically set up much more narrowly focused campaigns.
Yes, well, we had 2 segments on how to efficiently spend your marketing budget wisely in both the Facebook webinar as well as the YouTube webinar. So again, if anyone would like to have a recording of those, please just let us know. So Scott, even though it's a national campaign, you'd probably build smaller, more targeted campaigns?
Right. Well, like I said, I alluded to it in the video. We might create an ad that only focuses on cool places, for instance, rather than the jobs themselves, like this video did. So a video that features young people working on a cruise ship and in the mountains and at the beach, and then, you know, we'd make that the video, and then we'd just choose travel in the interests and behaviors drop down.
And then similar to our YouTube webinar, you could perhaps make a video that caters to women, I would think. I mean, I don't know the ratio of ranch hands who are women, maybe a lot, but I happen to know that only 1 in 5 yoga instructors are men. So I think there could at least be targeting and videos that cater certain jobs to the audience by gender.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's another way to narrowly target it. And again, we only target them really narrowly because we want to make the absolute best use of our marketing budgets by creating messaging and images that speak precisely to the right target.
Okay, at this point, before we get into alternative search engine pros and cons, we're going to pause for just a minute and tell everyone about who we are at Response Mind Digital and what we do. Scott, you're up.
Okay, this won't even take 2 minutes, actually. I think everyone by now understands who we are at RMD, and we're a digital marketing agency. So with that said, the first thing to do when we take out a new client is to do a deep dive on who their best prospects are. We look at who their biggest competitors are and what their keywords they're ranking for, their competitors, both the competitors and them, and both for organic and paid search results. We analyze lookalike audiences. We actually create our own polls depending on the size and the type of the prospects. And then we analyze it all. And we do this so that we can start our campaigns with the absolute best information for how to narrowly target our marketing campaigns. A little like Karen and I were just talking about. And that's what this audience segmentation insights project is about. If you're interested in us doing the legwork on the research and analysis for who and how to target your best prospects with digital marketing, just click the button that's going to come up on your screen in just a second, and we'll get back in touch with you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. That was quicker than 2 minutes, I think. Well done. So next we're going to go over alternative search engines to Google search, but we would really appreciate it if you'd answer the poll on your screens right now. We'll give you a few seconds to answer those 2 short questions. And I think we'll leave the poll up for a minute, but if we're going to finish by the top of the hour, we'll need to push on. But I really want to thank everyone ahead of time for participating. We really, really appreciate it. All right, for the final segment on alternative search engines, Bella is going to tell us more about search engines that are not Google.
All right. Well, there are a lot of search engines out there that appear to be cashing in on this privacy thing. Many of these search engines are actually European companies that recognize even earlier than here in America that privacy was becoming a big deal in Europe.
Which is probably why the EU passed the General Data Protection Regulation in 2018.
Yes. Well, as we alluded to earlier and spoke about regarding Facebook, I think it's definitely true that people in European countries have been very wary of their internet privacy for much longer than Americans have. And as a result, the EU passed the GDPR in 2018. And some states, I believe we mentioned in the US, appear to be following their lead as well.
Right, like California's CCPA or California Consumer Privacy Act.
Right. So that may be part of the reason that attention to privacy has been catching on, because these businesses selling to consumers in California have to be cognizant of that law.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll know more in time. We're still on the cutting edge of how privacy concerns will impact search engines. So, Bella, tell us which of them is your favorite search engine.
So that would actually be DuckDuckGo. I've set it as my default and decently like their search results.
Okay, but why is it your favorite?
So DuckDuckGo is a play on a children's game, Duck Duck Goose, according to the founder, Gabriel Weinberg. And the game reminds me of my childhood innocence, as I suspect it does for many people. But DuckDuckGo was launched as a private search engine way back in 2008, so they were way ahead of the curve. They were self-funded until 2011 when angel investors wanted in.
And that's when they really began to grow.
Yes. In April 2010, they averaged 39,000 visits per day. By August 2012, they were up to 1.2 million. In 2014, Apple announced that DuckDuckGo would be included as an option for search on both iOS 8 and with the Safari browser. And then later that year, Mozilla added DuckDuckGo as a search option to Firefox 33.1. Then in 2016, DuckDuckGo officially announced a partnership with Yahoo. They also partner with Bing, Yandex, and Wikipedia. So it seems like kind of a Cinderella story to me.
Right. So Let's say I'm an advertiser and I want to advertise on DuckDuckGo. How do I do that?
So advertising on DuckDuckGo is actually done through their partnership network, namely the Microsoft Ad Network or the Bing Network.
I suppose that makes sense since Bing is the biggest competitor in the search space against Google. Bigger Bing's network, the better for them, I guess.
Right. Well, Bing may have a much smaller piece of the search market share than Google, but Bing can probably claim that their network is quite a bit larger too. In fact, here's how Bing refers to their search network, showing a larger percentage of the search share than many might have guessed.
Yeah, and it's been growing, but I would guess that part of that growth is through the growth of their network partners.
True, and you can see that they reference the PC market share, which is likely because most PCs, rather than Macs and other computers, are loaded with the Microsoft Windows operating systems, which presumably has Bing as the default search engine.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I suppose if Apple's Mac computers default to Safari, which, as we've said, won't allow third-party cookies, then Google search could be looking at the beginning of a problem there. At any rate, I think we're at the place where maybe you should tell us what the advertiser sees when advertising.
Yeah. Before I show the Microsoft advertising platform for search, I thought I'd show Google's platform for reference. So that's what's on the screen now. I just want you to notice how the campaigns are set up running along the left navigation. Then the inside, that is the overview, recommendations, campaigns, ad groups, ads and extensions, all the fun stuff. And then you have a graph and table of your campaigns beneath that.
Yeah, and that shows your spend, clicks, impressions, and whatnot. So the paid search gurus who are tuning in are already probably very familiar with this layout.
Right. And I just wanted to point that out because we've run into people who haven't yet advertised on the Microsoft Ad Network because they didn't want to have to learn a new search platform.
Yeah, that makes sense. It looks like a lot to learn, and Bing's network is smaller.
Right. But here's the Microsoft interface.
Huh. Yeah, they look pretty similar.
Right? Of course, this is an actual account we work on, so we grade out the detailed account information. But anyway, I just wanted to point out this similarity for anyone who may be resistant to learning the new platform.
So as Google has continued to change its user interface over the years, Microsoft has continued to change along with it.
Right. Essentially, they mirror Google.
So they're essentially identical.
Their user interfaces are pretty similar, but they have some different features too.
Such as?
Well, it could probably be argued that Google has had a more robust platform with Microsoft lagging behind for general B2C uses. For instance, Microsoft just recently added the ability to upload lists of people, which Google has had for a long time. And I think it's still in beta, so it may not be available for everyone just yet, but that is a really helpful feature.
So as a reminder, remarketing lists are good for continuing to reach out to people who appear to be good prospects, such as people who have come to your site more than once or who have started a shopping cart and abandoned it. And all of that can be tracked. So as long as you have tracking and tagging set up on your site, and if you don't, you might want to talk to us about helping you get that set up.
Yes, but besides remarketing, most platforms allow you to use audiences as negative lists too, similar to how negative keywords work.
So what do you mean by negative lists?
So for instance, if you're a bank and you're trying to find new customers, you could upload your current customer list, like people who occasionally come online to check their balances. You may want to exclude those people from advertising because they're already your customers. And you can do that with negative lists. It helps with better using your marketing budget.
Yeah, and we see that Microsoft Advertising also has similar audiences here.
Yes, well, as we mentioned, Facebook calls them look-alike and Pinterest calls them act-alike, but Microsoft Ads calls them similar audiences, the same as Google does. But it's probably important to note that Microsoft has smaller audiences to match against, at least when compared to Google.
Which is why Google is more expensive.
Yes, that's probably true. And I think this is an important point. It also means you might be able to own more of the audience for a particular set of keywords in Microsoft Ads because that space isn't as crowded. And if more people are seeking out options other than Google, as seems to be the case, this might be a good time to expand the scope of your marketing. With that said, the intelligence for Microsoft's demographics may not be quite as strong as Google. For instance, we think age under demographics is a little more iffy than it is in Google, but again, it's hard to say exactly.
Okay, and again, that's because they have more limited data. I mean, what do we think Microsoft is better at?
Well, we actually think Microsoft has much better company, industry, and job function information. And this is especially good for B2B marketing.
But if they have less data, then why would they be better at company information?
Well, they may have less overall data because fewer people use the Bing search engine, but Microsoft actually has more of some types of data. Because most businesses use Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft has that business information and should be able to more accurately predict whether people or where people work and what type of jobs they have.
Yeah, and I kind of get the sense that all of this is driving back to the reality that Microsoft is also tracking people online, like Google, with their browsers and their email exchanges.
That's true. We wanted to show the differences between Google's search and the alternatives like DuckDuckGo, which you can access via the Bing network. But yes, Microsoft Bing search also tracks users' activities.
Okay, well, we've certainly talked up DuckDuckGo throughout this presentation. So maybe you could just tell us super briefly how we can advertise on the search engine DuckDuckGo.
All right, sure. Well, DuckDuckGo is a part of the Microsoft network. So to advertise with them, you'll find them under Search Partners. It's a campaign level selection for each campaign. So you go to the ad group level, click on settings, and then click on add distribution under other sections or other settings. Easy peasy.
Okay, great. And that's going to wrap up our webinar today. We've gone 2 minutes over. I'm so sorry. Thank you for hanging with us, as most people have. We'd really appreciate it if just before you leave, you'd all fill out the feedback form on your screens now. That would really help us.
And before you go, I have one more slide, so please do fill out the feedback form, but just listen in on for another 60 seconds if you can spare it, because I thought it's not a commercial. I'm just going to kind of tell you, people who have attended one or more of our webinars probably realize by now that I just really geek out over this kind of stuff. So, where you're able to actually make great business decisions based on what your competitors are doing. Well, those little colorful circles there on the screen are a Venn type diagram that represent total medical keywords for an organization and how they're ranking organically against their competitors. So if your organization is the purple circle, you're ranking for far fewer keywords, which you can tell by the size of the circle. And the blue, green, and orange circles are all fighting for that one little small area right there in the middle. And so that's good to know. And we can show you what those keywords are in order to figure out if those keywords are worth fighting for. Because good SEO can bolster your ability to win in that space. But the real beauty of the Venn diagram is, I think, it makes you question why your competitors are ranking for keywords that you're not. For instance, if I'm, the blue organization, why aren't I ranking for any of the keywords that orange and green share? And why isn't there overlap between all of them? It's a really great exercise to go through because it helps inform you what your SEO strategy should be. So let us know in the feedback form if you're interested in learning more about this stuff.
Okay, and that really is it. I think Scott sent an email to everyone with today's agenda. So if you could reply to that, or if you're interested in speaking to Scott and asking him questions directly, just take note of his phone number here.
It's been great having the chance to talk to everyone today. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody. See you
Thanks,
next time.
everyone. Bye.